taste of sweet surrender, a subtle awakening, a creamy caress of silky smoothness. Get ready to be amazed.
JavaScript.
Pure
Developer.
passion.
Welcome to Dev Dive In. Today we're going to be recreating this silky smooth effect here using StyleX and JavaScript. Facebook has recently released this StyleX library and it's getting a lot of attention, and I just want to do a fun project to see what it's all about. So to find a project that I want to sink my teeth into, I went onto your word site and found this Enigma digital. And lo and behold, I found this smooth effect that I thought it might be fun to recreate. Now when you mouse over it, the dot gets bigger and it morphs around as you move. And when you move your mouse left to right, the boxes get bigger and smaller. The effect is mostly going to be done with JavaScript, but we use StyleX enough to get a sense of what it's like. And there are a couple things that are fundamentally different from what you would normally find in a CSS to JS library. And I found a couple things that I didn't really like, but I'll get into those a bit later. With that, let's dive in. So first things first, before we get into the effect, we need to create the layout, and we just want to create a layout with two cards side by side essentially. So we're going to need two cards, and we're going to need the container that holds them both. Looking at our main page, we did exactly that. We have our main component, and then we have a container for our cards, and then we have two cards, and inside of each of those we have an image. So to center the card on our page, we're going to add some styles to the main, and that's just going to add a margin to the left and right, and give it a width of 80%. Now to do that with StyleX, first you need to import the library. And StyleX has a create function, and anything in between here is the styles. So you give it an arbitrary name, and then we add the styles that we want. So the width of 80% and a margin of auto. You have to use the StyleX props function, and you have to pass in the styles that you created as a parameter. And then you deconstruct this. So what this styles.props does is it creates the class name prop. And based on the styles that you created, it'll create class names for those. And it's kind of like Tailwind. It'll create a class for the width. It'll create a class for the margin. But at build time, it's going to create a arbitrary name for each of those. So looking at what it outputs, it'll create a human readable class name. And then each of these class names is going to be related to the styles. So this first one is for the width, and the second one is for the margin. Now looking at the cards container, we'll get into the styling of that next. This just has a section and a div, and in that I'm applying the container and the card holder styles. The container is just adding padding around the cards. This is so the cards aren't right up against the edge. In the div, we just have our card holder. We're just adding a display flex and a flex direction of rows, so they're side by side. Now let's style the cards themselves. So we go to the card component, and it has a children prop, which is going to be the image that's passed in, and an href, which is the link for clicking on the image. Then we're capturing all the other props and adding them to the div down below. We'll need this later on when we're developing the dot that's floating around. Looking at the HTML, we have a div with an anchor on the inside, and this adds styles to children I'll get to in a second. So let's look at the styles of the container. And that's just adding a margin left and right. This is just to space out the cards so they're not butt up against one another. Now looking at add styles to children, this is because we wanted to add styles to the image that's a child of the card. Now normally in regular CSS to JS libraries, you would do something like this, where you would reference the image as a child, and then you could put any styles that you want inside of there. In StyleX, you can't reference the children inside of a style. It uses any internal objects for pseudo classes. So if you want to add a hover, or say you want to style a placeholder for an input or something like that. I couldn't really find a good way to do this within the styles, within their documentation. So if you ever found a way to do this, please leave a comment. Back to add styles to children. This is how I figured to do it. And that's just to loop through the children, in our case images, and I'll add a StyleX style to each of those. So here's the function. You can use the React child map to loop through all the children, and you just pass in the children that you want to loop through. And the second parameter is a function that passes in the child that you're looping through. And then I'm just cloning that child, and I'm modifying the props of that child by adding the styles image prop. So that's going to return an array of children that have an updated styles. Looking at the image, you could see it as a human readable class, and then each of the classes for each of the styles. So the width of 100, height of auto, and a border radius of 0.5 rems. So at this point, we have our cards laid out. Now we can get into the animation aspect of it. If we look at the effect, we can see that as we move from left to right, the other one changes. So if we think of the container's width as a percentage, so if my mouse is at the very left, it's at 0%, and if it's at the very right, it's at 100%, then we can use that percentage to determine how much of the effect is being applied to each of our cards. So let's start with that. Moving back into our cards component, you'll see that we have a ref here. So we're creating a use ref. And that's just so we can reference this div for our animation. And the first thing we want to do is add a use effect so that we can capture our mouse move. And here, we're going to make reference to that ref that we created. And if that exists, we're going to create an event listener for mouse move, and then we're going to call a handle mouse move. Now it's good practice for when the component is removed, we want to remove that event listener. So we return a function, and if the card holder exists, we remove that event listener. Inside that handle mouse move, we're making sure that the card holder exists, and then we're going to calculate how wide one of the cards should be, and then from that, we're going to figure out how wide the other card should be. So as an example, as we're moving, we might calculate the first card, and then based on that, we can figure out what the width of the second card should be. So we created this getCardWidth function, and we're passing in the card holder and the mouse event. Inside of that, we're getting the width of the card holder, so we can figure out where the mouse is in terms of that percentage, 0 to 100. We have our mouse X, so where the mouse is on the screen. And we're taking our mouse X divided by the container width, so that'll give us how far along the mouse is inside of that container. So as an example, if it's all the way to the left, it's going to be at 0. If it's all the way to the right, it's at 100%, and in the middle, it's at 50%. Now I'll get to this distance and min in just a second, but really this is what's calculating the card width. So we have our percentage, so how far along it is, and then we're multiplying it by distance and then adding a min to it. So to understand what this means, I'll get rid of this. Now when we look at the animation, it's working, but it's really, really small. One's really big and one's really, really small. So if we add the min to it, that'll just increase the size of whatever the smallest one to be the minimum size. So in this case, at least 30. Now you'll see it's not really moving all that much, and that's what the distance is, how much you want it to actually scale up and scale down. So if we add distance back in, this is going to increase how much it shrinks or grows. Now you'll see a drastically larger change between 0% and 100%. Now this is just getting the width of the one card, and we can figure out the extra card width by subtracting it from 100%. Well, actually 98%, I just want to give it a little extra breathing room. So if you look at our card, we'll figure out the first card, and the second one is 100% of the width of the container minus the first card's width. Then I put it in an array just so it's easier to deal with. And then I went through and found all the cards. I looped through each of the cards, and I'm using GSAP, which is an animation library. And you just place what you want to animate as the first parameter, and the second parameter is all the options for that animation. And we want to adjust the width of the card, and the index is whatever card we're currently looking at in our loop. And I'm just saying, if it's the first card, take this one. If it's the second card, take this one. And I'm doing that as a percentage. And the easing is just so that it is nice and smooth, how long it should take. And the overwrite, because the mouse event fires quite rapidly, this overwrite will prevent it from having to wait till the animation is finished before creating the next one. It's just going to overwrite the previous animation that was going on and apply the new values. And that's it for the card animation. We have a nice fluid animation. Now we need to create the dot that follows the mouse around and shrinks down when it's off the card. Now to make this work, I used a third-party library called Mouse Follower, and I just imported the CSS and the library itself, as well as GSAP. Now this Mouse Follower needs you to register GSAP with it, and then inside of our page, I added a use layout effect, and I created a new Mouse Follower. Now the Mouse Follower is going to look for any element that has this data cursor text on it, and you just add whatever text you want to show up inside of the large bubble. So in this case, I just added view details to each of the cards. So adding this Mouse Follower, that's going to give us a black dot that morphs in size and moves around. The problem is we wanted a purple dot with a sans serif font, if you look at it. So to get that, this is another problem that I found with StyleX. Now the mouse follower library requires us to modify this class in order to change the color of that bubble. Because StyleX doesn't allow us to change any children class within its styles, I had to put it within the global CSS to make it work. And once I've added the color, the font family, and the font weight, now it's how we wanted it to look. And that's it. We recreated this silky smooth effect using StyleX and JavaScript. We tracked where the mouse was in relationship to where the mouse is in the container, so from 0 to 100%. And then we resized the cards based on where the mouse is. Then we used the mouse follower library to create this silky smooth ball that follows us around. So what is my overall impression of StyleX? There's some good, there's some bad. Now this project didn't use all of its features. There's a lot of theming features which are nice. It has a lot of the benefits of Tailwind, so creating a class for each of the styles without the long syntax that you usually get with Tailwind. I really hate how the StyleX props outputs the actual class name props instead of just the class names that are inside. So I would have preferred something like this, just so you can add your own class names if you want without too much trouble. You have to jump through a lot of hoops just to add your own classes with what they have. That being said, I understand why they did it. Doing it this way forces you to stay within the StyleX ecosystem. And my other beef with StyleX is that they broke the C in CSS, so they got rid of cascading essentially. So if I want to add a class for all anchor tags across, I either have to create a link component and use that link component everywhere, or use theming, and then for every anchor tag that's in my page, I have to add that theme to an anchor using this StyleX props, which seems like a bit of overkill. Using StyleX with other third-party libraries, they don't really play nice together, I feel. And where I think StyleX would really shine is if you're creating a design system, which makes a lot of sense for major corporations like Facebook. So overall, I probably won't use it in my day-to-day. I think there's better CSS, JS libraries out there, but there are some nice things about it that I feel a lot of people can benefit from. So if you like this type of content, we'll be doing more project-based stuff on this channel in the future. So be sure to subscribe for that. And thanks for watching. See you soon.